We're getting to that point in the fantasy football season where we are starting to learn a lot, and we are going to give you our top 10 takeaways from week 5 of fantasy football and what it means for your fantasy football teams today. On this episode of the Fantasy Football Fellas podcast, welcome in Lucas Wenzel, Cameron Lawrence, Tyler Plath, all hanging out with you tonight. Fellas, one word about week 5 before we dive in.
Exciting.
It feels like we say exciting every single week.
Because it's the NFL.
That's not exciting.
It was revealing.
Revealing is a phenomenal word because I think as I said, we're starting to learn a lot. We're starting to learn the truth about a lot of players in fantasy football this year, both the good, the bad, and the surprising. And I think that's going to cover a lot of what we're going to talk about in today's episode. We're learning the ugly truth. We're learning the surprises about a lot of players, but we're also finally starting to remember, hey, you know what? Some guys are just really freaking good, and it just takes them 4 weeks to get going, and we don't have to worry about it. We saw this last year with a multitude of players. We'll talk about those players and so many more in this episode. Let's not waste any more time, fellas. Let's dive in to the top 10 takeaways from week 4 of fantasy football. All right, we're going to do this round robin style. 10 takeaways. 3 from each of us. Actually, 4 from Tyler this week. He gets the 10th bonus one this week. But we're going to break down the 10 biggest takeaways from week 5 of fantasy football, what it means for your teams in week 5 and beyond. Cameron, I'll let you kick things off here. What is your first biggest takeaway from week 4?
Josh Dobbs is good enough to support multiple fantasy weapons in Arizona. Dobbs himself has been pretty good. 2 top 8 finishes in his last 3 games, scoring 25 against the Giants and then 23 last week against the San Francisco 49ers. But when we're talking about the Cardinals, we're talking about a team that most people had discounted, right? We were talking about Marquise Brown was like the wide receiver 38. James Conner was almost the wide receiver 30. Zach Ertz wasn't even drafted in most leagues. And now Marquise Brown, 3 straight 16-point weeks. James Conner was disappointing last week, but he's coming off a 16 and 19-point week, averaging 15 points on the season. Michael Wilson has dropped 10 and 26 in the last 2 weeks. And Zach Ertz himself is second in tight end targets right now, just behind TJ Hawkinson. I know the fantasy points aren't quite there, but the fact that he's second in tight end targets is, that's a pretty big deal moving forward. Yeah, and so just the fact that we were so worried, what is it going to look like with Clayton Tune, Colt McCoy? Well, then we got Josh Dobbs, and he has shown, hey, against the Cowboys and the 49ers, 2 of the best, probably top 5 defenses in the NFL right now, that he can not only support these guys, but give them great fantasy weeks. And so moving forward, I think I'm buying in on the Cardinals because there's really no defense they're going to face that's going to be tougher than the 2 defenses they did just face. So, yeah, I think Marquise Brown, James Conner are definitely buys. Michael Wilson, Zach Ertz, guys, I'm looking at the waiver wire. I don't know. I'm starting to get a little excited from a fantasy perspective about these Arizona Cardinals.
Yeah, I feel like this is something that at least I would like to say I've brought up on the show multiple times before the season started. We've literally had guests on the show who have brought this up too, where it might just not matter how bad you think this Cardinals offense is going to be, and that ugly volume is just going to be enough. Like Dave Kluge came on and he's like, I'm probably not going to turn on any Cardinals game this year, but you go look at the box score at the end of it. You're going to say, holy crap. How did Marquise Brown go 7 for 96 this week? Like, I don't know how it happened, but they're down by enough points where the garbage time is just going to pile it up. Mm-hmm. And that's exactly what we're seeing here, right? Like you said, Marquise Brown, 3 straight weeks at 16 plus fantasy points. Michael Wilson this week. Holy crap. He had himself a week. Like, what if they're just behind in enough games and the offense is just competent enough that everything is going to be okay? Mm-hmm. And that's exactly what's happening here. Ty, you want to toss anything in there?
It just feels like there's always an overreaction to, oh, this team is going to be bad. Like, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be bad for fantasy. They could be bad in real life, but that doesn't automatically take them out from being relevant in fantasy. And there's some truth to it in the sense that, like, sure, it's going to be a little more tough. They're going to have tougher opponents, stuff like that. But like you said, like, there is some ugly volume that can get you points on a week-to-week basis. And we weren't talking about these guys as like league winners or, guys that are going to over exceed the expectations, anything like that. We were just saying for the value that you're getting them at, they are going to outproduce some of the guys ahead of them and everyone else that they were going by. So all the takeaway of like, just because they're on a bad offense doesn't mean that they're going to be bad for fantasy. I feel like is a pretty consistent thing that we've seen year to year. Like, it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter.
I mean, it's okay. And so I do want to say, I don't know if we can always apply that to every team. Like the Tennessee Titans are another good example of this, right? Like, I just want to also throw that disclaimer out there. Like, you look at DeAndre Hopkins, where, yeah, he's the number one in Tennessee. But the reason why a lot of us were concerned about DeAndre Hopkins was not because, they weren't going to be good, but because of how this offense is structured, about how the offense runs, about how the defense is even structured, right? Where the defense can keep them in a game, kind of, sort of, if they don't get lit up by the opposing quarterback. But like, you look at DeAndre Hopkins, the problem is, like we said, Marquise Brown and James Conner are going to get volume because they can both be targeted in the receiving game. James Conner is going to be the only running back who touches the ball. But you look at DeAndre Hopkins, 13 targets in week 1, but ever since 5, 7, 6, those are his target numbers. Like, that was the concern with DeAndre Hopkins. It wasn't that he wasn't talented. It wasn't that he wasn't the number one option. And it was that this offense doesn't run through the pass. It runs through the run game. Mm-hmm. And that we just never had that concern for Arizona, where they're going to be balanced enough where Marquise Brown is going to be fine with his volume. Yep. And he's been a better option than DeAndre Hopkins this year, who was drafted ahead of him. So it's just one of those where I don't think it's like a one size fits all scenario where if an offense is going to be bad, that it automatically applies to them. I think you have to do a little bit of a deeper analysis to how the offense actually runs. Like, what is the engine of that offense? But the Cardinals were one where it was kind of obvious. Like, there's nobody else there, and they're going to be behind in enough games. It was as simple as that.
Yeah.
Ty, I'll kick it over to you. What is your first big takeaway from week 4?
Guys, I think we found the quarterback to break the Ohio State quarterback curse.
I can't believe it. I can't believe it, honestly.
CJ Stroud is the real freaking deal. And I think back to draft time when there was a lot of, I'll call smoke because it ended up being Bryce Young, number 1 to Carolina, but there was a ton of smoke of CJ Stroud to Carolina. And I think it is way too early. Jury is still out to say that, like, oh, CJ Stroud should have been the first overall pick, or, Carolina should have looked elsewhere. We are way too early to say that. But just based on the first 4 weeks, and you can tell just based on who's more or less comfortable in the league, CJ Stroud is killing it in terms of rookie quarterbacks. He's averaging 21 fantasy points over the last 3 weeks. He's averaging 300 yards a game on the season. He's averaging a touchdown and a half a game. He has 0 interceptions on the year. He's been doing this with his second string offensive line. Like, the amount of injuries that the Texans have had on their offensive line, where Laramie Tunsil has been out a game or two, Titus Howard, opposite tackle, went on IR. They were missing interior offensive linemen. They've been missing so many pieces along the offensive line, and it hasn't mattered. It hasn't. Nico Collins, Tank Dell have emerged as the 2 fantasy relevant wide receivers because of CJ Stroud. Bobby Trees himself. We thought that he was going to Houston when you are pretty much on the last couple of years of your career in the NFL.
That's a death sentence.
It's a death sentence, but CJ Stroud has given him some kind of relevancy in very, very deep leagues as a deep flex option. Like, this Texans offense, very similarly to the Cardinals, their offense is a lot better than people expected. Yes, the run game is still kind of an issue. They haven't really figured it out. I know Dameon Pierce just went for 100, but like,
they played the Steelers. Congrats. You want to know how many other running backs have had success against the Steelers? Quite a few.
Exactly. So again, CJ Stroud is legit. He was in our waiver video that came out Monday, because we're recording this on Monday. I almost said today, but it came out on Monday. He needs to be rostered. And if you have a quarterback like Dak Prescott, Trevor Lawrence, Joe Burrow, really any quarterback that hasn't really been meeting expectations so far, go add CJ Stroud and ride out the success until your stud quarterback starts producing, because CJ Stroud and this Texans offense, they are not slowing down anytime soon.
Yeah.
Just go ahead and steal my notes from later in the episode.
Is that what
he went down and looked at? Yeah, no.
A cheater!
He definitely did that.
What a cheater! Oh,
now I got to restructure my entire point later in the
get rid of
episode.
him.
I won't spoil it. Anyway, sorry. What were you saying, Cameron?
I think that's just the way the Houston Texans have just gone. Okay, we're going to trust in CJ Stroud. He's got the third most attempts right now in the NFL. He's averaging 300 yards a game, like Ty said. Like, they're letting him air it out, and the fact that he has no interceptions shows they're not going to stop. If he's not turning the ball over, you're just going to continue to throw the ball. I also want to point out, like Ty said, in deeper leagues, Bobby Trees is a good flex option. Bobby Trees has one less target on the season than Nico Collins right now. He's top 20 in targets with 31. I know the last 2 games he's been 6-6, but still, the fact that he's getting at least 6 targets a game, all these wide receivers at times are going to have fantasy relevant weeks in the same week, just because of the amount that they're throwing the ball and how well CJ Stroud is playing.
So I want to go back to my statement at the beginning when Ty said, the Ohio State quarterback curse, it might be broken with CJ Stroud. I'm like, I can't believe it. It's not that I didn't believe in the talent of CJ Stroud. It's that in his rookie season with the Houston freaking Texans of all teams, like, this is not a situation where CJ Stroud should be going for 300 plus a game, averaging 20 plus points a game. Like, this is not a situation where a rookie quarterback should just walk in and look better than Trevor Lawrence in his rookie season, right? Like, this was not supposed to happen. Not that CJ Stroud wouldn't be good, but that he's been this good, that he's been a top 10 fantasy quarterback. This was not what anybody signed up for / expected this year. So CJ Stroud, yeah, he is phenomenal. We'll touch on him more later in the episode. Even we'll throw him into another takeaway here that I want to make sure we touch on, but that'll come later in the episode. But yeah, CJ Stroud, he is playing phenomenal. You want to know who else is playing phenomenal? As I get into my first takeaway here, I'm just going to stick on the quarterback theme. Anthony freaking Richardson. My gosh. That dude, Ty, you said CJ Stroud's the real deal. Anthony Richardson, he is everything and more than what we could have asked for from him in his rookie season. Like, Ty, you and I were watching Red Zone yesterday, and we were watching, like, those Colts, like, they were down 23-zip. But every time Anthony Richardson just steps on the field, I don't care how bad he looked passing. Let me break down his performance yesterday. He was 11 of 25. 11 of 25. That's a 44% completion percentage. He only threw for 200 yards. Okay, that's a pretty bad day for Anthony Richardson. Yet this man, against all odds, scores nearly 30 fantasy points, 29.6. 3 scores on the day, 2 through the air and 1 on the ground, 10 rushes for 56 yards. You watch him play, and when he steps on the field, you just get excited. Mm-hmm. Like, there is something. He just steps out on the field, just the presence he has. I'm not even watching this man live. I'm watching him through a 55-inch TV. And you watch him play, and it's exciting. Just like, at any moment he could break off an explosive play. And he's flashed that. And Shane Steichen has put him in situations to succeed. And even when he doesn't succeed in that situation, oh my gosh, it's still nearly 30 fantasy points. Mm-hmm. He is a top 10 lock rest of the season. Lock, like, can't even question. Top 7 lock, I would say. And I'd even be willing to hear the argument for top 5 lock. Because if Joe Burrow doesn't step up, if Justin Fields doesn't step up, you're looking at Hurts, Mahomes, Allen, Lamar, Herbert. Those are like the only 5 that I could think of that you would maybe start ahead of him for sure on a given week.
Yeah.
I mean, it's phenomenal what he's doing, and it's his rushing upside that's getting him there. It's these rushing touchdowns, and Shane Steichen putting him in situations to be successful. He is electric. He is phenomenal. He's must-watch TV despite if they're being down 23-0. I would even say he's the reason they were even able to come back in that game. You think Gardner Minshew would have led that team back 23 down? That's not a dig on Gardner Minshew, but like let's be honest for a second. Like, do we think Gardner Minshew could have done that?
No.
Probably not in that fashion, no.
No, not in that right. Not in that fashion. 100% agree. So Anthony Richardson, he is the real deal. If you drafted him, he is very clearly the Jalen Hurts of this year. Very clearly the Josh Allen of this year. If you want to throw Danny Dimes into that mix, but he is so much better than Danny Dimes. I'll tell you that right now. In terms of fantasy, at least. Mm-hmm. Like, so he is that guy this year. He was that late round quarterback that's just like, I don't know, he's a starter. And if I'm going to swing on somebody in the latter rounds and just stack up my team, Anthony Richardson's that guy. And oh my gosh, did that pay off for you?
Yeah. My only pushback is a little bit over 33% of his points have come from rushing touchdowns. Cool. And it sounds like Jonathan Taylor is coming back this next week. Is that concerning at all? Because I understand, he's still going to have touchdown upside. Rushing upside. He's still going to have all that. But this is a guy who's averaging under 14 attempts a game and has half the amount of passing yards that Jordan Love has this season. So, does that worry you at all with Jonathan Taylor coming back? Like, does that show apprehension, or are you still all in on Anthony Richardson?
No, I'd still be all in because, so I'm going to compare the situation to Philadelphia. I'm not saying the Colts are as good of an offense as the Philadelphia Eagles. That's not what I'm saying here at all. But Jalen Hurts is what option at the goal line for the Eagles? One.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying Jonathan Taylor is a much better running back than DeAndre Swift. We can all agree on that. Mm-hmm. But even let's say, Anthony Richardson, if he doesn't score a rushing touchdown last week, he still scores 23 fantasy points on the week. In week 2, yes, I know he had 2 rushing touchdowns, but you even take one of those away, that's still 11 points through 1 quarter of fantasy football. Mm-hmm. To finish, I'm not saying he's going to score 11 every single quarter. He's going to total 44 points, but he's well on his way to 20 through the first quarter and a quarter. And then in week 1, again, you take away that touchdown, he's only at 16 on the week, but still the way the pathway is still only up in terms of his development, in terms of his potential. And if they are around the goal line, I think it's a 50-50 shot whether him or Jonathan Taylor gets a touchdown. I don't think it's just, Anthony Richardson's rushing touchdowns are going to go away. Even if they're at the 10, all Anthony Richardson has to do is find one hole and he's gone. He's in the end zone.
Yeah.
So I the threat is still prevalent literally every single week.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that, just because you look at Miles Sanders last year, 1,200 rushing yards and 12 touchdowns, right? And JT could easily do that this year, and Anthony Richardson still has that huge rushing upside. Jalen Hurts had 13 rushing touchdowns last year, and they do not have A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith where they have to feed him the ball on this team. So I do think he could have the same upside. I don't think they're going to score as much as the Eagles, obviously.
No, right.
The offense they have. But I would agree. I think the upside still stays even with JT coming back.
I want to see exactly how much of Anthony Richardson's rushing attempts are designed runs versus scrambles out of the pocket, because if majority of his rushing attempts are designed runs, then Jonathan Taylor's presence does affect it just a little bit. But if most of his rushing attempts, or maybe even his touchdowns, because that's where you get the most points, are just from scramble drills and stuff, or I shouldn't say drills, but just scrambling around and finding, the open side of the field, then I think there's a world where Anthony Richardson and Jonathan Taylor can coexist. So there's potential still for Anthony Richardson to, like you said, be top 5. And while you're talking, I was like, I'm not even going to accept a top 10 argument. He's top 5 only for me. But then Jonathan Taylor,
when you throw out those 5 other names,
right,
it's you can make a case for any 5 of those guys over Richardson on a given week.
Yeah, but still, Anthony Richardson, CJ Stroud are the 2 best rookie quarterbacks this year, and it's not even close.
No, it's not even close. Yep. Bryce Young can't even hold a candle to them right now. Let's take a quick break, and we will come back with 7 more takeaways. Today's podcast episode is brought to you by our friends over at Underdog Fantasy. Now, we love Underdog. It is the easiest place to play best ball formats, and they even have their own form of player props called Pick'em. You can make up to 20 times your money on a single night by correlating props together. 2 picks will triple your money, 3 will 6 times it, 4 will 10 times it, and 5 plays that all hit will multiply your entry by 20. You can even place insurance on your picks too, so if only 4 of your 5 props hit, you still get 10 times your entry. And if you use our code FELLAS when signing up, Underdog is going to double your first deposit up to $100. Alrighty, we are back, and we are going to break down 7 more takeaways from Week 4 fantasy football. Cameron, give us your second biggest takeaway from Week 4.
We talked about guys who've been good as rookies. We're going to talk about another guy who is great as a rookie, Zach Wilson. I'm just kidding. I don't know if you want to call it the Aaron Rodgers effect or the Taylor Swift effect, but Zach Wilson actually looked good last night for the Jets. He went for 240 passing yards. But this is where I'm going to start kind of showing some pessimism. It was only the 6th time in 25 career starts that he hit 240 passing yards. He had his highest completion percentage at 72% in any game with over 30 pass attempts. That is 10% higher than any other game he's had with over 30 pass attempts. It is his first game in his career with multiple touchdowns and no interceptions. He did lead Garrett Wilson to a top 15 or to a 15-point week with 9 receptions on 14 targets for only 60 yards. And Kansas City was a top 7 defense against quarterbacks from a fantasy point perspective, right? They're allowing the 7th least amount of points. So, right, Zach Wilson looked great, but this is an anomaly. And I think if you're going, hey, Zach Wilson, he's got to figure it out. This is something that I would need to see, a couple more times. This doesn't mean that you should be going out and buying on Garrett Wilson. I don't think. I think that's something that people are gonna look at this and go, man, maybe if Zach Wilson figures it out, Garrett Wilson kind of, return to where he was drafted, like start returning that value. And I think that's a trap. We've seen, mediocre to bad quarterbacks have, good weeks. And, hopefully Zach Wilson can start playing at a better level. But it's not like he was elite last night, right? He was good for what a quarterback should look like. He led this team to 20 points. So, they're not scoring a crazy amount, and Breece Hall and Dalvin Cook didn't really do anything on the ground. So I don't know about you guys, but I'm looking at this as a one-time event, and I'm not going to start trusting in Zach Wilson unless we see multiple games being put back and forth. And that's kind of the approach I'm going to be taking with this Jets offense as a whole.
If I'm a Garrett Wilson manager right now, I'm going to look to sell. I'm going to capitalize on 14 targets for 15 fantasy points.
Yeah.
So just looking at the Jets schedule, next handful of games, let's say 4. They get Denver next week. So potential. I'm not going to say it's a guarantee. It's potential.
I mean, quarterbacks have looked great against Denver this year.
Yep.
Justin Fields finally looked like a competent quarterback against Denver. I can't say competent. He actually looked really good, except the fumble and the interception at the very end there. He did choke that away. But like Justin Fields, he looked pretty good against Denver.
And then you've got Philadelphia after that. So that's going to be a little rough. And that's thankfully home. It's not in Philly, but still it's a tough matchup. Then they go on bye. Then they play the Giants. Then they play the Chargers.
All right. He's got opportunity.
So there
is opportunity there.
There's opportunity. And I think for me, at least, Zach Wilson, it's more of a that's encouraging than it is like, okay, this is what I'm going to expect every week, or this is a legit performance that we're going to see on a week-to-week basis or anything like that. Like, proceed with caution when it comes to Garrett Wilson. These Jets running backs are virtually unplayable. I know Breece Hall had 14 points, something like that, but he was struggling with 9 on the back of 3 receptions before breaking off a 40-yard run. So again, just proceed with caution with these Jets players. I can understand selling on Garrett Wilson, but I wonder how many people just are in a spot where you can't really trade Garrett Wilson still, just because people still are not going to be bought in on the Jets.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I just think his upside is what we've seen from Baker Mayfield so far. I think that's going forward. If he starts playing really well, I think that's what you can expect as the ceiling for Zach Wilson this season.
And I don't think we're going to get that. I don't even think we're going to get that high. I do think this was an anomaly. I don't think Zach Wilson is, because it's not like Zach Wilson hasn't had a decent game before.
Mm-hmm.
Let's be honest. He's had a handful of decent games. He's had way more WTF games.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, Breece Hall, Ty, you talked. He was sitting at 9 and he broke off a 45-yard run. Like, he only had 6 rushing attempts. He only played 44% of the snaps. Yeah, he had three receptions for a whopping 13 yards. Like that. Somehow he was a running back 21 on the week with 9.9 points. I don't know. That doesn't excite me.
No.
Not that Breece Hall really excites me right now. So yeah, I don't think it's. Clearly the running backs just are. I don't want to touch them on the Jets, but more important, not buying into to Zach Wilson. I just made me look stupid on our picks last week. I freaking hate.
Well, hey, guess what? DTR pretty much sold out on Amari Cooper too. So
I mean,
what else?
That's fair. That was to be. Yeah, we didn't know that prior to. So disadvantage of making picks on Thursdays. Ty, I'll kick it over to you. Give me your second biggest takeaway from week 4.
The Saints players are virtually unplayable now. I mean,
really?
I would say so. I like you still have to play Chris Olave because he's a big play waiting to happen. You should be starting Kamara just based on what we saw this past week. But like Michael Thomas, I think the days of flex consideration are pretty much toast. Derek Carr is negatively impacting the outlook for all Saints players. Kamara had 13 receptions on 14 targets, which sounds great. Only for 33 yards. So that stat line just on the surface just tells me it is dump offs, it is screenplays. Like there's not much happening in those catches. Granted, it's still 13 fantasy points, so beggars can't be choosers, but like, I mean, it is what it is. Chris Olave, 1 reception on 4 targets. Yikes. Michael Thomas had 4 receptions on 6 targets. Not super great. Derek Carr's ADOT through the first 3 weeks, he was averaging his average was at 11. Week 4, 8.2. His yards per attempt, he was averaging 7.2 through the first 3 weeks. It dropped to 3.7 in week 4. Literally half. It begs the question, why is Derek Carr even playing? It was surprising when the report came out that that there was some optimism that he was going to play. I'm no doctor. I am no sports medicine person. But when I hear my franchise quarterback sprained his AC joint in his throwing shoulder, I'm going to tell him you're not playing for at least a week. Like that's just it's stupid. It's stupid is what it is. And now because of this, Derek Carr is not going to take a week off. So now Chris Olave's outlook, instead of top 5 some weeks based on matchup, is a low end wide receiver 1 at this point. Michael Thomas, like I said, I would kick him out of any kind of flex consideration. Kamara is still going to be solid just only because of PPR. I just don't understand the decision to play him. And now we are going to have to deal with the consequences as fantasy managers because we're trying to send a message about trying to tough it out through an injury and whatnot. I just don't get it. It is frustrating if you have any of these Saints players.
Can I play devil's advocate? Throw out a little scenario.
Let's do it.
Does this actually make Alvin Kamara more startable?
Oh, so if there's one person that benefits from this, it's Alvin Kamara, without a doubt. But
I'm not saying he's an automatic start now, but like,
right. I guess I made it sound all doom and gloom for every Saints player. It's really Alvin Kamara. Benefiting him, but Chris Olave, downfield targets, Rashid Shaheed, downfield targets, those are gone. Those are just gone now.
So you're saying more so until he's healthy, which could,
Correct.
if he's playing through, it could be 5 weeks.
Could be the rest of the season. If he's playing through it. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
I want to. When is the Saints bye week?
Right, because that might be when it actually is, and then he can get the much needed 2 weeks rest that he needs. But
week.
Do they have
8?
a later bye week? Do they have like a week 12 bye or week 10?
I wonder. Week 8, no one's on bye. Week 9, no. Let's skip to week 11.
I got you.
Week 11.
I do. Okay,
Week
so
11 is their bye.
The
So
late
we're looking 7 weeks down the road yet. 6
Yeah.
weeks down the road. And that's 6 games. By that point, we're looking at the fantasy playoffs already.
Mm-hmm.
Is Chris Olave a sell candidate?
I was just about to say, I wonder if Chris Olave is a sell at whatever price you can get. I'm still going to try to sell as if he's top 10, but fully knowing that with a beat up Derek Carr, you're probably not going to get a consistent top 10 receiver week to week.
I think I would just wait until midweek at least to see reports if they're going, hey, you know what, maybe Carr's not. I just want to see if he's practicing this week. You know, maybe they're like, hey, what we saw last week, we can't do again. You know, that would be my only hesitation, would just be to just wait till he starts practicing again. And if they're like, he still looks like he's not throwing the ball, you know, the way he should be, then, you know, you start thinking about if he's just going to continue to play. But that would be my only hesitation on selling Chris Olave.
What percent of this is an overreaction versus like applicable like takeaway? Sorry, that makes it sound like your takeaway wasn't actually a takeaway, Ty, because I know, because it 100% is. I think this is important that we note, but like when we talk about like this is 1 week, it's 1 week. I don't know. We don't know Derek Carr. We don't know how bad his shoulder hurts. The evidence we have is that clearly it was bothering him. He's not throwing as many downfield passes. Yes, I haven't seen the numbers on whether that's analytically true or not. But if Alvin Kamara is racking up 13 targets, clearly Derek Carr doesn't want to push the ball down the field, that he's comfortable just dumping off to Alvin Kamara. So what percent of this is like, it's only 1 week, we might be overreacting? What other percent? But what other percent is it like? Maybe you should take some action on this now and see what kind of a jump you can get on selling Chris Olave, on getting what you can for Alvin Kamara, or maybe even just holding on Alvin Kamara, not selling him right now. Like what percent do we have of like, okay, it's only 1 week, maybe we should relax a little bit, versus like, let's actually do something with this?
I'd say it's like a 75 takeaway, 25 reaction, 80-20 even, because at the end of the day, talent wins out. So do I think we see another 1 reception, 4 target performance from Chris Olave? No, not at all. I think the Saints also adjust the game plan a little bit, but I just don't see a world where Chris Olave gets double-digit targets when Derek Carr is pretty much playing at 80% of percent health. Like I try to be optimistic, but at the same time, it just doesn't. It's like 2 + 2 is equaling 5 in this scenario for the Saints, and it's like, how hard can I justify that it actually does equal 5, if that makes sense?
That Derek Carr is fine and we don't have to worry about it at all.
Yep,
exactly.
I mean, especially when you're playing from behind in that game. I think that's the thing that baffles me about Chris Olave. I mean, they were down 14-3, made it 14-6 going into the fourth quarter, and Chris Olave only musters 4 targets on the day. Like that tells me either the Bucs clearly just game plan for Chris Olave and boxed him out. Again, I should probably go back and watch the film on that and see.
I'll watch
Chris
that
Olave
tonight.
wasn't targeted. There you go. That's on the agenda for tonight. But yeah, like, it is concerning. It is concerning after this week.
for sure.
There's a lot to hash out there with all these Saints players being affected. But yeah, I mean, there was no need to throw out Derek Carr this week, yet they did, and clearly something was up. Clearly something was up. So we'll keep it moving here. I'll get to my second biggest takeaway. I'll transition to something more positive, man. How about Devon freaking Achane? He did it. He did it again. Like 2 straight weeks now. 20+ fantasy points. Oh my! I love Devon Achane. Ty, thanks for trading me him in our dynasty league. Great, you got some really nice pieces out. I can't.
No, I didn't.
Yeah, you did. You got Saquon Barkley.
Yeah, and how many games has he played? And I got Jerry Jeudy. How has he done so far this year?
But you got your guy George Pickens.
Yeah, but what else has he done?
I'll take
as much as
all 3 of them.
Justin Jefferson
I'm just saying.
and all your draft capital.
For George Pickens only. Look, 8 for 101 and 2 scores yesterday. This is like the perfect, like, don't let the box score, don't let the depth chart preseason dictate your opinion on a player. Like, was it concerning that Devon Achane was that buried down on the depth chart behind Jeff Wilson, behind Savon Ahmed, behind Miles Garrett? Like, sure, initially, yeah. But when this dude gets out on the field, real action, real game, not just preseason, and shows out like this, you got to reward the man. 8 for 101, 2 scores. As I said, he had 3 catches for 19 yards. And by snap count, he actually was the lead running back in this game. Dwayne McFarland on Twitter of Matthew Berry's Fantasy Life, he broke down the snaps by quarter for both Achane and Mostert and compared that to their overall snap total on the game. So by quarter, in quarter one, Achane, he played 58% of the snaps. Mostert played 62. In the second quarter, Achane was at 57 to Mostert's 43. Again, 57 in the third for Achane to 28 for Mostert in the third, and then 11 and 39 for 66% of the snaps for Achane and 41% of the snaps for Mostert. So Achane was the clear running back one in this game. What's also kind of weird, though, they were basically essentially split in terms of touches. Achane, he had 8 rushing attempts, 5 targets, 3 receptions. Mostert 7, 5, and 3. So this was a deadlock split here. Now, Jeff Wilson, he may be coming back into the mix here as early as next week, coming off of IR. And now we don't know if that's next week, but he's eligible to as early as next week. So what does that actually mean for this backfield? Let's say Jeff Wilson does come off of IR and is back into this mix. What does that mean for this backfield? It's already, well, here's what we know. It's already a full-blown committee. It split touches between Achane and Mostert. We know that. So this is probably going to be a 3-headed monster. But with how good Achane has been the last 2 weeks, you can't take him off the field. He's an explosive play waiting to happen. He's lightning in a bottle. Mm-hmm. So you can't take him off the field. But Mostert's also been looking really good through the first, he worked really good through the first 3 weeks. Obviously didn't get it done in week 4, but it's not like you can't play Mostert either. He's looked really good so far this year. So this is going to be a 3-headed monster if Jeff Wilson comes back. But here's the crazy thing, though. All 3 of these running backs could be fantasy relevant options. That's how good this Miami Dolphins offense is. It's just so high powered that whoever has a hot hand in a given day, it could give you 25 plus, while the other 2 give you somewhere between 6 to 12. And I'm not saying 6 to 12 is what you're rooting for either of those 2 guys, but those also aren't guys you can cut because they could have a big day on any given week. So what I'm worried is that Devon Achane, he has this massive game, 2 massive games in a row, and we're going to continue to start him. And there are going to be weeks where you're just going to get burned. Mm-hmm. And we don't know when we're going to be able to start him because we don't know which Dolphins running back. I'm not saying you should go out and sell Achane. You have to hold on to him because, my gosh, 75 fantasy points in the span of 2 weeks? Like that, those don't just grow on trees. You have to hold on to Achane. But I'm just trying to add some applicable context here to dominance over the last 2 weeks and what it means now that we're going to have Jeff Wilson coming back into the fold eventually. Jeff Wilson might not even come back till we might not have to worry about this till week 7, 8, 9, 10. We don't know when Jeff Wilson's coming back. But as of right now, Achane's got to be in your lineup until this backfield becomes a 3-headed monster because he has just been too freaking good the last 2 weeks.
My worry with the Dolphins backfield or Dolphins team as a whole is it's going to start feeling like the 49ers, where Tyreek Hill is their Christian McCaffrey. And every single week you're like, who is it going to be this week? And you can have a week like Deebo Samuel just had where he had 0 targets. Or, you could have the George Kittle weeks, and that could be Jalen Waddle, Devon Achane, Raheem Mostert, because they just have so many weapons and they can use them in so many ways. But you also have a guy like CMC or Tyreek Hill who is just that much better than everyone else, right? He is at pretty much anytime he's on the field, he's the best player on the field by a lot. And they're always going to get theirs. And it's just going to be trying to figure out who's going to get what on what given week. That's what worries me the most about pretty much this Dolphins team as a whole moving forward.
I just keep coming back to the idea that Mike McDaniel should be fired if he goes, okay, Achane, you're only going to get 5 touches out of, so you can't I feel like the frustrating thing with this Dolphins team moving forward is going to try to predict who's going to be the hot hand, because I'm sorry, Jeff Wilson, Raheem Mostert, and Devon Achane, they all feel like the same running back in some ways.
Yeah, that's what sucks.
It sucks. So like I think the main takeaway, at least moving forward, before Jeff Wilson comes back, you still are starting Mostert and you're still starting Achane. Like you have no choice but to. And like I don't think we can necessarily say that this game against Buffalo is the way it's going to be moving forward between these two, because Raheem Mostert did fumble twice. So I wonder if that had an impact on the snap count for him. And I wonder if it's actually going to be more of a 50-50. But even if it is a 50-50 split, you still play both because they are home run hitters and they can make the most with whatever snaps and touches they get.
Yeah. I think the thing too is Miami's going to be looking towards the playoffs, and they have Mostert, who's never had over 180 touches. Jeff Wilson is coming off the IR, and Devon Achane, who's one of the smaller backs in the NFL. I think they're going to try to do as much of load management as they possibly can moving forward. Because honestly, the way they've been looking, they're not going to have to worry too much other than, seeding later in the year. And if they're, like you said, very similar running backs all around, then I think they're going to try to load manage these guys as much as possible. And that's just going to be frustrating because how good Achane is moving forward.
Yeah, that wouldn't surprise me. I don't know if I'm necessarily predicting that, because I could also see Mike McDaniel just like, no, put my best guys out on the field. We're going to crush everybody. Sure. I mean, granted, they got squashed by Buffalo this week, but I digress. Achane, he's a real freaking dude. And he's got to be in your starting lineup now. You kind of have no choice but to start him after these last 2 weeks. Let's bring it home, fellas. We got 4 more takeaways here. Let's fly through these last ones here. Cameron, give me your final biggest takeaway from week 4.
Yeah, I'm going to keep this one short. It's just A.J. Brown and Josh Jacobs are just showing you why you don't panic on good players, right? A.J. Brown had one down week, and people are like, oh, man, should I be trading A.J. Brown for, whatever wide receiver 2 you can think of? And the answer was no.
Collins.
Yeah, exactly.
He was on fire through the first 2 weeks.
And Nico Collins had a great week again, but if you're going to look at who's more sustainable through a season, it's A.J. Brown. And he proved it this week. Wide receiver 1 on the week, 175-2. He had a great week last season. Josh Jacobs hasn't looked good on the ground, but he's proving, you know what? I'm one of the best players on this team. They're going to get me the ball. And they did that. He had 8 catches on 11 targets for 81 yards, 27.2 points, top 5 running back finish, right? These guys are just proving the same thing we say every year. Good players are going to figure it out. The guys who are, haven't been there last year, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, this year, Raheem Mostert, right? He's, like we said, he's still going to be good, but he's not going to maintain running back 2 the rest of the season. And that's just looking at situation. That's looking at talent. That's looking at what we've seen year after year. So you look at guys like Jalen Waddle, Derrick Henry. I'll even throw like Terry McLaurin. Like, I don't think they're going to be as good as what we've seen in the past, but they're going to start to bounce back because of just how talented they are, that they're going to continue to put up fantasy points. So those are guys that you maybe can buy low on. I think they're all I'm not calling all 3 of those buy lows because I think they all come with an asterisk, but I am just saying that I think over the rest, like a full season, players that have been good in the past and have proven that they're studs are going to continue to be studs unless it's something dramatic has changed moving forward.
I got really tired of seeing panic on Josh Jacobs videos coming across my timeline. I don't. It's 3 weeks. We literally had 3 weeks, and I get managers want to make moves as soon as possible, but this is like, ironically, I was talking to my supervisor at work today. She's not the biggest football fan in the world, but she'll happily talk football with me, and she wants to learn more about football, and I'm happy to chat with her about it. But we were talking about how I told her, I'm like, this is the time of the year where now I'm finally starting to get a good read and assessment on some of these players. Where who can I buy low on now over the next 2 weeks? Who am I like? Okay, I can breathe a sigh of relief. I mean, A.J. Brown was always that guy. I was never concerned about A.J. Brown. Josh Jacobs, you're like week 3, you're like, oh man, that offensive line sucks. Yeah. He's really doesn't look that good. Then he comes out and does what he does this week. And it's just like, good players are going to get the ball in their hands. They're going to make something happen with it. Now, I think it was ridiculous to expect a year like we did last year from Josh Jacobs. But that being said, like we know he's extremely talented, that you shouldn't panic on him. And if you traded him away, I'm guessing he's going to be in a lot of sell high videos this next week. And I'm going to be tired of it by the end of the week. Not because I don't think Josh Jacobs is going to absolutely crush and put up, 27 plus points the rest of the season, but good players do good things when they get the ball in their hand.
Yeah.
And Josh Jacobs is one of those guys. Right. So yeah, I got kind of tired of it because it's like it's 3 weeks in. If you're really panicking at 0-3, you have 12 weeks until the playoffs. If you go 8-2 the rest of the season, which is possible, anything is possible in fantasy football. You're making the playoffs. So it's just one of those where I kind of got tired of it, and I'm glad we kind of get to close the book on that narrative of like you should be panicking. I don't.
Yeah.
Concerned, sure, I'll allow concerned.
Yeah.
But if you're like, no, panic, got to sell them. That's how you get burned in the first 3 weeks.
Yeah, I even think back to last season. I think, Lucas, your team was 6-7, and you made the playoffs in our Dynasty League and won it all, right?
And I won it all. Yeah.
You just got to make the playoffs. You don't have to be the first seed, right? There is no home field advantage. I mean, unless
I was the
obviously you have a
last
bye.
team that made the playoffs.
But that's all you got to do. You got to make the playoffs. Once you make the playoffs, anything can happen. So you shouldn't be panic selling on your best players just to get depth pieces, because you don't win fantasy championships with depth pieces. And, you still need these studs on your team. And you just got to trust them a little bit. You got to trust yourself a little bit, right? There's certain players, yes, that you can panic on. And, Lucas is going to talk about one of them in a little bit. But for the most part, you should be trusting your studs unless there's something obvious.
100% agree. Ty, I'll kick it over to you. Technically, you have one more after this, but the 8th biggest takeaway from week 4.
This feels like it happened in week 3 because it happened so long ago. But this Lions backfield is disappointing. I mean, if you're a Jahmyr Gibbs manager, if you're a David Montgomery stan, like I am, you're kind of accelerating a little bit. But the takeaway here is that it's looking more and more like the DeAndre Swift, Jahmyr Gibbs role is not so much about the player, but it is the role that the coaches have put into the system. It's really not as lucrative as we thought it would be, which doesn't make sense with the talent that they've had for the role, because you look at DeAndre Swift now and he looks like one of the better running backs in the league.
Yeah.
Then you've got Jahmyr Gibbs, who is a speedster. You spent top 12 draft capital on the guy, but clearly it's just not a priority for Ben Johnson and Dan Campbell. And Gibbs's highest usage so far this year was in the shootout. Yes, like he did have 17 carries against Atlanta when Montgomery was out, but even in the shootout, he got more usage. So essentially, in a normal game, I'll call it, because you're not going to get it in a shootout every week. In a normal game, yeah, shocker, right? Who would have thought that? In a normal game, Jahmyr Gibbs is unfortunately just a change of pace, unlimited snaps running back. And that just is so painful, because you see the potential for Jahmyr Gibbs to be so good in this offense. But it's clearly the role that the coaches are giving Jahmyr Gibbs and not the talent of Jahmyr Gibbs. So there is a debate on, talent wins out at the end. So is Jahmyr Gibbs a buy low, essentially. But I think just given the track record of what we've seen with DeAndre Swift and what we've seen so far with Jahmyr Gibbs in this role, how much better can it really get? I know it can get better some, but like, if you're I'm not expecting this situation to get a lot better, if that makes sense.
Dan Campbell's public enemy number 1. Public enemy number 1 for the fantasy community. No. How can you do this twice? DeAndre Swift. I love that man. Mm-hmm. I'm glad he's thriving in Philly. I was out on him this year, admittedly, but he looks the part in Philly. Jahmyr Gibbs, you're going to spend top 12 capital on him. You're not going to use him. You're going to let him just be a nice shiny toy. You'll let him sit on the shelf, see an antique. I don't get it. I don't get it. I'm upset.
So I'll be the optimist. Okay.
No.
Yes, I will. I will be the
If
optimist.
there's one person that I thought was going to be optimistic, it is for sure you.
So talked a lot this offseason about Alvin Kamara. Christian McCaffrey's rookie seasons, right? They were the number 2 backs in their backfield. If you look through their first 4 games, Christian McCaffrey had 42 carries. Alvin Kamara had 15. Jahmyr Gibbs is at 41. Right. So he's actually out carrying Kamara, who was the running back 3. The difference is the targets. Gibbs is at 18. Kamara was at 28. McCaffrey was at 29. So they were getting more targets. But what gives me optimism is 25% of Gibbs snaps so far this season have been in the slot or out wide. So they want to use him in the passing game more. And I think you saw it. They had 2 or 3 design plays to Gibbs. And I think they're wanting to do that more. It's just going to take him time to get used to that. So that does give me optimism that they're going to use him in the passing game. And like if you saw that Green Bay game, they got up so big, they're not going to be throwing the ball to Gibbs as much, right? They want to run the clock. They want to eat in. And so that is going to be part of the problem. You're going to have those frustrating games where it's just like, why give it to David Montgomery? Because he can just get 3 yards every single time, and they can just give it to him 4 times in a row and get a first down, 4 times in a row and get a first down. And they're just going to keep doing that over and over again. But I think that Gibbs is in a spot where as long as the targets start to increase a little bit, he's going to get more and more fantasy relevant. And, we have Jamison Williams coming back, but I don't think Williams is going to steal targets from Jahmyr Gibbs. He's a very different player in a very different spot of the field. It's just going to come down to, can he get enough with Laporta and Amon-Ra St. Brown in that offense?
Go for it. Because I got to just go.
My short answer to that is unfortunately no. I don't think so, because I don't think there's going to be many games where Detroit is going to be playing from behind or in a shootout. Like, I just think they're going to be in control most of the games just based on the schedule that they have. So, like, there may be opportunities. There may be some games where Jahmyr Gibbs, take 50-yard house call, something like that, right? And you just kind of have to get lucky with it. But I think it's just incredibly frustrating, incredibly difficult moving forward, trying to predict, like, is this going to be Jahmyr Gibbs this week? Is this going to be the week that happens? I don't really know anymore.
I know people are tired of hearing this guy on Twitter, but I got to be that guy. Like, if David Montgomery doesn't suit up on Thursday Night Football, do you know how big of a week Jahmyr Gibbs could have had? Do you know? He could have had a colossal week. He could have gone for David Montgomery put up what, 31?
34.
Gibbs put up a 40 burger with his receiving yards, receiving totals. Mm-hmm. Like, the Packers are Swiss cheese against the run. If David Montgomery suits up, he was an automatic start. And unfortunately, we put out a buy low video last week saying you should buy low on Jahmyr Gibbs because David Montgomery, it didn't seem like he was going to suit up for Thursday Night Football. And of course, it comes out originally Thursday. Oh, David Montgomery likely not going to play. Gets corrected an hour later. No, it's like David Montgomery's playing. There was only one drop for that, and I too busy expressing my own grief because Dan can't. He's going to do it again. He is going to do it again. Mm-hmm. I appreciate you having optimism, but he's going to do it again. And no, you can't buy low on him from me in Dynasty, if that's your question. The mustard seed of optimism that I have, and that's enough for me right now. Yeah, I mean, you're not disappointed with David Montgomery this year because this is exactly what we were hoping for and more with David Montgomery. But for Jahmyr Gibbs, all the hype that he was getting earlier this season, from us included, all the stats, the history was there, and Dan Campbell's just gonna freaking do it again. And I can't believe fool me once, shame on Dan Campbell, but fool me twice. That's shame on me there.
This is my hill, and I'm gonna die on it.
You can die on that hill. Just give me a good offer in Dynasty for him. Let's move on to someone else that I am infuriated with. I wish I had a panic alarm button. I need a drop for that. I need to sound the panic alarm. I know I just talked about how we don't want to panic on guys. You don't hit the full-blown panic through the first 4 weeks. We have to on Joe Burrow, though. Until he is fully healthy. We talked about Derek Carr. We're seeing that impact the players around him. We have to do it with Joe Burrow. The man is playing injured. If it's not against the Tennessee freaking Titans, a pass funnel defense, I have zero clue when it's going to be for Joe Burrow. When is he going to fix it? I know I just said he's out there playing on an injured calf. But the Titans so far, let me tell you who they have been diced up by this year. Derek Carr in week 1 went for 305. Justin Herbert in week 2, yes, a talented quarterback, went for 305. Deshaun Watson in week 3, that man threw a backwards pass. He got spun around. He got thrown into the spin cycle and said, F it, Elijah Moore's back there. And we went behind him. Watson went for 289. And Joe Burrow can only go for 165? Are you kidding me? It's unacceptable. When is it going to change for Joe Burrow? Like at this point, you're looking at probably week 12 or 13 before Joe Burrow gets his crap together. Because here's the deal. They get Arizona and Seattle the next 2 weeks. Those should be 2 good matchups for Joe Burrow. Do you trust Joe Burrow in the next 2 weeks?
No.
That's a question for you too.
No, I'm not starting Burrow.
No, I'm not either. So I'm not trusting him the next 2 weeks. If he does something against Arizona, we can revisit this. But as of right now, I don't want anything to do with Joe Burrow for the next 2 weeks. I frankly don't want anything to do with Joe Burrow until he gets a break this year, until they bench him, until they say he can't suit up, until they say the calf's bothering him too much, until he gets his bye. But the problem is they get a bye then in week 7 after those 2 games. But after the bye, they get San Francisco, Buffalo, Houston. Now you think of Houston's like, oh, you should be able to dice up Houston. Houston just gets torched in the run, and quarterbacks don't have to perform against Houston. That's just the sad truth. But then they get Baltimore after that. And then if you want to look at week 12, it's a divisional matchup with Pittsburgh. So maybe he's better against Pittsburgh. But we all know AFC North divisional matchups, they don't happen through the air. They happen in the trenches.
Mm-hmm.
So here's what I do if I'm a Joe Burrow manager. I am sprinting to the waiver wire and making CJ Stroud my number 1 priority this week. And if I lose out on CJ Stroud, 1, I'm pretty upset. But if I miss out on CJ Stroud, I am doing whatever I can to flip Joe Burrow into Kirk Cousins, to flip Joe Burrow into Dak Prescott, to flip Joe Burrow into Trevor Lawrence. One of those 3 guys, I'm praying I can flip Joe Burrow into. And you want to know what sucks about that, though? You're going to have to pay more than Joe Burrow to get one of those guys. You're going to have to convince the other manager to take Joe Burrow off of your hands. That's what sucks about all of this, is that you spent a 4th or 5th round pick on Joe Burrow, and now you literally have to sell him. You have to pay up to get 75 cents on the dollar for him, which is just stupid. It's abysmal. It's unfathomable in some context that Joe Burrow could be this bad and that it's time to hit the full-blown panic button on him. It just sucks. But if we had a panic alarm drop, I can't believe I didn't think of that before this episode. I am smashing it right now. Thanks for coming to my 4-minute TED Talk on Joe Burrow, because it is abysmal. It is abysmal. If it's not against Tennessee, when is it?
Yeah, I do have a fun stat for you. Comparing him and CJ Stroud. They both have the same amount of attempts this year. CJ Stroud has 500 more yards. Same amount of attempts, 151, and CJ Stroud has 500 more yards. Burrow has 4.8 yards per attempt. But I do have a question for you, Lucas. We're talking about these guys. How does this affect then Jamar Chase, Joe Mixon? Like, what are your thoughts on those 2 guys? Because, right, we know T. Higgins is out. But for the fantasy relevance of Joe Mixon and Jamar Chase, there's a lot of people who are wondering about what to do with those guys. What do you do with those 2?
I mean, Joe Mixon, he's still going to... The thing is Joe Mixon's still going to get the dump offs. Mm-hmm. And Joe Mixon is who he is. Yeah. That's just kind of the reality. Like, if we expected more out of Joe Mixon than, 12.5 fantasy points he's averaging this year, because that's what he was last year. Joe Mixon hasn't changed for me. Jamar Chase is where it gets interesting, though, because you look at T. Higgins, he's injured now. So, okay, that opens up a lot more opportunities for Jamar Chase, which theoretically, what did he drop? 14 targets this past week? Mm-hmm. Only mustered 72 yards out of that, I believe. I mean, theoretically, Jamar Chase still should be fine. Jamar Chase has put up 2 back-to-back, startable weeks, I would say. Not a phenomenal week this past week, but like T. Higgins' injury right now is kind of the saving grace for Jamar Chase, if we're being perfectly honest. I also can't stomach going out and selling Jamar Chase, for 75 cents on the dollar, because again, we talked about it on this episode. Talent wins out at some point, and Jamar Chase is just a different breed of wide receiver. You don't just grow Jamar Chase on a tree. Mm-hmm. So part of me is like, maybe if you can get, another solid wide receiver, a low end wide receiver one, and a startable running back in return for Jamar Chase. Maybe I would need to see the package first, but I'm also I'm just not. You can't actively sell Jamar Chase either because T. Higgins is out right now.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe by the time T. Higgins comes back, it'll be, Joe Burrow will be back with it. But I don't know. He's got a tough stretch of matchups after the bye.
Yeah.
So you're stuck. You're stuck with all your Bengals players, and you probably can't do anything with them. And it sucks. And I'm sorry, those of you who bought into the Bengals offense. A lot of us did this year. They're supposed to be good.
Yeah.
This calf injury is just derailing everything.
I know we're going a little long here, but I'm just looking at the route chart from Next Gen Stats with Jamar Chase. It's concerning. And not just say they're not using him down the field enough. No, it is a complete difference from week 3 to week 4. Week 3, where he had 12 receptions for 140 yards, to week 4, 7 receptions, 73 yards. His week 4 route chart looks a lot like week 1 more than it does week 3, where week 3, there's a ton of outbreaking routes. There's a ton of shorter completion attempts, all that kind of stuff. Week 4, it went right back to the normal.
What's the normal? What's the normal? Because week 3, it sounds like you're saying he was used all over the field in terms of downfield targets, quick, easy ones to Burrow, almost unpredictable what Chase is going to do. So what did week 4 look like? Is it all short intermediate that Joe Burrow has easy completions for? What does that look like?
No, everything to the left side of the field is a vertical route, and everything on the right side of the field looks like it's going to be more outbreaking, but it actually stops towards the middle of the field. Versus week 3, there is almost I want to say a 60%, 70% of his routes are outbreaking to the sideline. There's 2 vertical routes. There's some in the middle. But the routes in week 4, this is something that I think you guys can look up, and I would recommend the audience looking up, and you can see the clear difference between week 1 and week 4 compared to week 3. That's a reason, and I'm trying not to overreact, but I'm gonna jump all, or I shouldn't say I'm gonna join the camp of trade Jamar Chase. It's concerning how it looks, and I'm not in the NFL. I'm not a head coach. I'm not an offensive coordinator. It's borderline negligence that the Bengals go back to what they were doing before the Rams game, where they had success against the Rams and they went back to what they were trying to do before. It makes zero sense. It's concerning to me. I would love to get your guys' reactions on it later, because I know we're going long on this, but everything about Cincinnati is concerning. And again, I can understand if you want to hold on Jamar Chase because of the capital you spent on him. If I was a Jamar Chase owner, I'd sell.
The problem is I don't think you're going to get anything worth a crap for Jamar Chase. I can't say worth a crap, but
what you should.
Is anybody what you should, right? What you should. I don't think anybody's going to be willing to give you 95 cents on the dollar for Jamar Chase. I think everybody wants 75 cents on the dollar.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I wouldn't be. I just wouldn't be willing to sell Jamar Chase for that, because his value is at 90 cents on the dollar. Fine. If I can at least get that, then you could talk me into it. But that's right. You're looking at who's the guy who could throw that category. A CeeDee Lamb, and I can't even think of a running back that you could throw in there that would be worth it.
Jordan Addison and D-Hop.
Yeah, miss me with all that. I'm not accepting that trade worth a darn. And we're moving on to Ty. We're going to get too deep down this Jamar Chase hole, as I own him in so many leagues. And maybe that's my bias showing that I just wouldn't trade Jamar Chase because I actually have him on a multitude of teams. But I'd keeping my bias out of it. That's where I see Jamar Chase right now. If nobody can give me 95 cents on the dollar, I'm just not interested in moving on at this point.
Mm-hmm.
Ty, I'll let you close it out here. Last final takeaway. Probably should have let that just be the final takeaway, honestly. But bring us home, Ty. What's the 10th biggest takeaway from week 4?
You name drop Dak Prescott and Trevor Lawrence as options for Joe Burrow, and I want to take a deeper look into both of their offenses, because so far this year it's been pretty disappointing. Okay, Trevor Lawrence is the quarterback 19, averaging 15 fantasy points a game. Dak is the quarterback 21, averaging just shy of 14 fantasy points a game. and their top wideouts, the top options, CeeDee Lamb has 3 finishes outside the top 24 after pretty much going as a borderline top 5 wide receiver, for sure top 10 wide receiver. Calvin Ridley has 3 finishes outside the top 30. It's concerning, to say the least. So what's happening? Let's take a look at both teams. What's happening? Dallas's average margin of victory this year is 31 points. You don't need to throw the ball downfield when you're winning by that much, right? Next 4 games for Dallas, you've got San Francisco, you've got the Chargers, you've got the Rams, and you've got the Eagles. Okay, the Cowboys are going to need Dak to step up if they want any chance of surviving in these games. Production, if I had to take a guess, production is going to come soon from Cowboys players because of the matchup. They need to rise up, and they will. Dak is top 5 in completion percentage. If there's one thing going for Dak, he's been pretty efficient when throwing the ball. So expect CeeDee Lamb to come back to the normal. We're going to – everything is going to come back to the mean. CeeDee Lamb will be just fine. Dak Prescott will be just fine. But the Jaguars are a different story. The run game for Jacksonville has been putrid, and it makes the offense look way more one-dimensional. Okay, ETN, while he's getting volume and receiving work, he's only averaging 3.8 yards per carry. And the offensive line is graded as bottom 10 in run blocking per PFF. Not good. And Zay Jones actually matters in this offense. Believe it, like, as big of a pill as that is to swallow, like, Zay Jones actually has a decent role in this offense. The passing offense couldn't execute against the Chiefs, but if they connected, right, not just Zay Jones, but the entire offense, if it clicked the entire game, Jacksonville beats Kansas City, right? There's no downfield threat because Zay Jones is out week 3 against the Texans, and they get smoked. No Zay Jones week 4 against the Falcons. And what did the Jaguars do as a response to that? They just shortened the throws. 26 of 30 attempts for Trevor Lawrence against the Falcons were behind the line of scrimmage or within 10 yards of the line of scrimmage. There was little to no deep shots at all that game. And they didn't really need to because they were winning. But you're seeing Christian Kirk thrive. That's because of shorter attempts. But when Zay Jones comes back, this offense is going to go through some more growing pains because they have to now go back to what they were doing before he got injured. So you have to hold fast on Jaguars players. It'll come around eventually, but right now you are going through some growing pains. So there is not a whole lot to panic, in my opinion, when it comes to Jaguars and Dallas players. You have to hold. They will come through eventually, but man, is it frustrating in the meantime.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, you look at the Cowboys, right? They haven't needed Dak, and the one game they did, the whole team just did not play well against the Cardinals. So I would pretty much throw that game out. And then the Jaguars, I mean, those wide receivers are not helping Trevor Lawrence at all.
None.
There are 6 players right now with 3 drops. One of them is Kadarius Toney, and another one is Calvin Ridley. Christian Kirk has 2 drops, and Tank Bigsby has 2 drops. Right, and there's only 20 or more players. There's only 20 players with 2 or more drops, and 3 of them are on the Jaguars. So his offense just isn't helping him out. And I think as the season gets going, I think Calvin Ridley is still shaking off a lot of rust. We just can't overemphasize how hard it's going to be to come back after pretty much 2 years off to try to be full speed again, game after game after game. Right, it's going to take him a little bit to get fully into it. So I think you're right. I think it's growing pains, and I think for Dallas, it's just haven't needed Dak yet. And the one game they did, the whole team just looked, So, yeah, I would agree with both those takes.
We'll close it out there. Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of the Fantasy Football Fellas podcast. 10 of the biggest takeaways from week 4 of fantasy football. We will be back midweek with another episode previewing the best matchups ahead of week 5. We'll be back on YouTube tomorrow as well. We'll have a buy low, sell high video. Back on Friday with another YouTube video of must starts, and we're tuning in every single day with shorts, with 60-second videos for you all. So make sure you're subscribed, turn on those notifications on YouTube so you know when all of our content is going up. If you're listening to the audio podcast of this, thank you so much for tuning in. If you wouldn't mind leaving us a nice little review, nice little 5 stars. We would greatly appreciate it. Helps boost us up the rankings and shows that, hey, there are people out there who are listening who actually appreciate what we do. I actually care more about that than I do being boosted up the rankings. That, like, hey, I enjoy the podcast that they do. I don't know about you two, but I appreciate being appreciated. We'll close out there. FF Fellas on Twitter, the FF Fellas on Instagram, Fantasy Football Fellas Facebook, and follow us over there, YouTube, TikTok as well. You also know when we go live on Sundays, Ty and I did a nice little duo live on Sundays. We might look into doing that a little bit more. That was kind of fun.
It was
a little bit of a different energy. So again, make sure to subscribe, turn on those notifications. We will see you all again midweek for a preview of Week 5. Till then, deuces.
Deuces.